All right, everybody, welcome to the Reality Meets Science podcast. We are so honored to have Professor Marion Nestle here, who has had decades of experience in nutrition as it relates to public health and teaching at NYU, and I believe at Cornell as well. Has written multiple books, including obviously food politics, but slow cooked. I like the personal approach to that, and several others. And if you don't know, and I doubt if you're watching this, you don't know who Professor Marion Nestle is, all you have to do is hit Google and you will see everything from a Wikipedia to everything else. Her credentials are beyond the scope of time we have here. We would be spending the entire episode on it. So thank you so much on your happy birthday, Professor Nestle. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I wanted to start this conversation with a stark fact, and that, the name of the podcast being Reality Meets Science. And that is that we have, 30% of our arable land in the US dedicated just to corn. Forget about all the commodity crops. I think it's 200 plus million acres. And we have about 4 million dedicated to fruits and vegetables. And if we wanted to even get to 2.5, 3 cups of fruits and vegetables per day, we need to be at 12 million. I mean, the reality is that the food system, the food supply is so twisted that even if, and I think I first learned this through Senator Harkin's research, and that, if everybody tried to switch to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables tomorrow, there wouldn't be enough, and we'd have riots, everybody fighting for broccoli, and the price would, go skyrocketing. And the point really is, the reality is, we're not going to get out of this quickly. It's going to be a, speaking of slow cooked in a sense, a step-by-step methodical approach to almost like remove a tumor or cancer carefully from society, rather than some hacksaw in which we try to get it out quickly. The tumor's out faster, but patient is dead. I mean, we have businesses now like gas stations that rely on the profit margins coming from, I call it CRRAHP, or calorie rich, refined, and highly processed. It happens to sound like crap, but and then I enjoy a little bit of crap. Don't get me wrong. It's the whole discussion about risk tolerance and calculated risk. But and movie theaters, and you could go on and on. I mean, Home Depot, you get in the checkout line, and all of it is there. The concoction of a Kit Kat, which I have a PhD in the anatomy of from Mom University, because Mom kept boxes everywhere. So I learned the whole anatomy of a Kit Kat, eating the top layer off and getting that wafer. When we're at that twisted of a food supply, a system, and corn going for, high fructose corn syrup, feeding animals in confined animal feeding operations, corn oil, ethanol, chips and cornflakes and whatever else. Some small amount is corn on the cob. By the end of it, who knows, what is it, 1%, whatever. That kind of disjointed nature, what would you say, if we were even optimally and carefully, not putting people out of business and banning things, and I know all the nuances that you discuss, how long do you think it would take us to get to even a substantially better, forget about perfect, a substantially better, is it generation, 2 generations? How long do you think it'll take us to get to a rebalance?
It depends on who wins the election.
Okay.
I mean, those are political issues. And it's interesting that you started with corn, because that's my favorite example. If you, my explanation of the food system, I can do it in one slide. And that is a Department of Agriculture graph of where the corn that's grown in the United States goes. And roughly half of it goes to feed animals. The other half goes to fuel automobiles. And in between, there's this tiny fraction that goes to feed people. And of that tiny fraction, an even tinier fraction is real food. The rest of it is processed food ingredients. That's our food system in a corn cob, or, not a nutshell, but a corn cob. And if you want to change that, you want to look at the food system as a whole and say, how can we design a food system that's aimed at feeding people and promoting human health and the health of the planet, and doing that all at once? And that means growing a lot more fruits and vegetables, but there's no profit in them.
And you got to get people to want them too, right?
You have to get people to want them, but one of the reasons why people don't want them is that they're perceived as costing so much. And one of the reasons they're perceived as costing so much is because they do. If you look at the rise in prices over the last 40 or 50 years, the price of fresh fruits and vegetables has gone up enormously, much faster than the price of junk food or almost any other kind of food, or food in general. So they become expensive commodities. They're perishable. People don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to cook with them. Lots of people don't like them very much or think they don't like them very much. Uh, that could be changed if there was political will to do that. But in order to do that in this society, you have to build in incentives.
Yeah.
And we don't have those kinds of incentives. The incentives are to make highly profitable junk food using inexpensive corn and soybeans as basic ingredients. So
And that,
that could change, but you need a political system that's interested in public health to do that. Public health is very unpopular these days.
you're not kidding. And while there's definitely controversy as to how much, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can to what the Farm Bill contributes to this in terms of the paucity for sure. I get confirm me if I'm wrong of any subsidies for fruits and vegetables or specialty crops because they're special and we should only
Rounding
eat
errors.
them. Rounding errors
Round,
exceptional.
they're referred to as rounding errors.
Oh my
The
gosh.
amounts are so small.
Exactly. And is there and I think you've said we just basically needed, and I wouldn't disagree at this point, trash the Farm Bill, let's start over. But and I would love some thoughts in that regard as to how much the market has been twisted, if you will. I'm going to try to avoid using, lightning rod words, but so that we have a setup for making it so there's 4 million acres of fruits and vegetables and 200 plus million for commodity crops, massive amounts of corn and so forth. What role do you feel the Farm Bill plays in the current state of affairs, and maybe even play devil's advocate? I'm sure there's others. I've had this discussion with Mike Jacobson, one of our common friends, who doesn't think it's as contributory. And I'm learning, so I want to learn more from a master than just to speak about it. What are your thoughts on the Farm Bill, and maybe its
Well,
origins and how it got to where it is today?
well, it has a very long history. It started out in the Great Depression as a means to help farmers get through the Depression. And the idea was to support farmers in those days were many and small. Um, and figure out a way in which to support them while producing food that could be donated to people who didn't have enough money to buy food at the same time. Because during the Depression, farmers were destroying their crops because they couldn't sell them to anybody. Nobody had any money. So it started out that way. But once you start subsidizing something, it's very, very hard to take those subsidies away. And the way the system worked out was that farms got bigger and bigger and bigger and more corporate. And the subsidies go to the largest, richest, biggest farmers. And they're not, farmer is kind of a joke. These are people who have corporate offices and employ migrant labor, if they can get it, to work on the farms. And the result of that system is the depopulation of the American Midwest, the change in the political climate in the Midwest as a result. And it's, they're now the corporate farms are the ones that make the money. It's almost impossible for mid and small farms to survive without having off-farm jobs. And there's something wrong with all of that. The basic goal has always been to keep the price of food as cheap as possible. It's hard for me to argue against cheap food. Cheap food means that even poor people can afford it. But the way it's worked out is that poor people can afford the foods that are worse for them. And rich people can afford the foods that are healthiest for them. And that's not what the intention was uh, in the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, once obesity started to be a problem, and I think the Farm Bill does have a factor to play in that, because what the Farm Bill subsidies do is they cause food to be grown in places where it shouldn't be, where there's not enough water, there's inappropriate climate, there are all kinds of problems because the farmers who grow those crops know that the government will step in and buy their crops no matter what happens and support them. So that's not a system that is looking at a kind of sustainable agriculture or regenerative agriculture or whatever you're calling it these days. It's a system that perpetuates the wrong kind of agriculture and a focus on making commodities cheap and healthier foods more expensive. And that's doesn't make, and we won't even go into the climate change aspects of this. The idea that half of our corn goes to feed animals when everybody would be better off eating less meat, not no meat, but less meat.
I don't know. Wouldn't mind going there. As you know, Walter Willett is someone that we have interviewed, and Eat Lancet, the Eat Lancet Commission. I think advocating an ethnic agnostic kind of flexitarian. Forget about brand names of diets. The idea of plant predominant, but not necessarily plant pure, minimally processed, less refined eating for the people and the planet.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about the Eat Lancet Commission and that conclusion?
Well, it was a little extreme, but the idea that you could have 13 grams of this a day seemed a little extreme. But overall, it had two main goals. You should double the amount of plant foods in your diet and halve the amount of animal foods in your diet. And that's not an abstemious diet at all. I
Yeah.
mean, there's nothing abstemious about that, but it changes the balance between plant-based and animal-based foods. That would be better for people's health and it would be better for the environment. I think there's plenty of evidence to back that up. Um, but very difficult for people to do. If you are, where was I? I was just at an event where there was food served at the event. There wasn't a vegetable in. Oh no, there were pickles. That was the only. That was the only vegetable
Some
in
vestige
sight.
of a vegetable.
Yeah, I mean, oh, and fried potato balls or something like that. But I mean, really, there was nothing that I would look at and think this is a real food. This is really healthy. Everything was fried. Um, and I like fried food a lot. I'm not complaining. Frying makes
Tastes great.
everything delicious. Yeah,
Yes.
frying makes everything delicious. But there were no choices and there was no balance. And I thought, okay, in that situation, you don't have any choice about what you're going to eat. So we don't have a food culture that values healthier diets and prepares them in ways that are delicious, and I don't think it's very hard to do that.
Immediate
So,
gratification tends to overwhelm the known concept. I don't know that the public knows this, but we're living 10 to 15 years of our last years of life in sickness and disease, which a lot of this is cumulative result of what we're eating and not moving as much too. I mean, the two balance out. But we are what we eat and we eat what surrounds us. Would we not agree with that? I mean, it's not
yeah.
this willpower idea to me is so silly in
Mhm.
terms of how we have really been designed as humans appropriately for most of human health history to be impulse eaters, because when you had a chance to eat, you would, and maybe there'd be a predator or a competing tribe, or maybe it could be a scavenger that want to come. Why would we want to portion control or eat slowly? We're not designed for that. What's changed around us is the environment. Our genes are very similar to 10,000 plus years ago, but our environment is completely turned around. And one thing I'd like to discuss and get your thoughts on is, there's all this fiery debate about seed oils and so forth. When I look at the big picture, I still think it was a good thing that we replaced beef tallow and saturated fat with unsaturated fats, but concomitantly, the number of calories, hundreds of calories have gone up in total over decades, maybe hundreds of calories more now than 1970. And you can change the quality of the calories however you like, but if you are going to be consuming more hyperabsorbable calories. I mean, we saw that recent study where you only absorbed about 78% of calories from a whole almond. But if it went to almond butter or almond oil, you're going to absorb 98 and 100% of the calories. So there's kind of a guilt by association that has come along with the argument against seed oils. They're processed and there's trans fat in them. No, there's not. Those were banned. That's not the issue. And how do you tease out from people this correlation is not causation when it comes to the seed oil argument. That to me, it's a mass calorie availability issue. Most calorie dense food is oils, and I love a little oil. I got some olive oil behind the screen there, and a little bit of grapeseed oil. But I think about portion control but it looks like our consumption of extracted fats has actually gone up significantly since the 70s. And if
Well,
your
actually,
quality,
our consumption of everything has gone up since the 1970s. Absolutely everything across the
right?
board.
Yeah.
Um, Nobody wants to talk about calories.
Oh,
And which I find very interesting. And I see seed oils, the arguments about carbohydrates and fats are really distractions from the basic issue, which is that people are eating more now than they did in the 1970s. There is a huge amount of very solid evidence to back that up.
absolutely.
Portion sizes alone are an explanation for the rise in obesity prevalence. If you eat a muffin that has 800 calories, that's quite different from one that has 200 calories
Remember,
in one muffin.
yeah.
And
Remember they
that's
just
what
had one
happened
size
to
for
muffins.
fries at McDonald's? It used to just be one, the
Yeah, I
small
mean,
used to be the default.
yeah, I mean, that's what happened to muffins is they went from what are now mini muffins to 600 or 800 calories. And bagels went from what are now mini bagels to these enormous things. And people are surprised when they're gaining weight. And one of the things about ultra processed foods that is really interesting to me is the now very well demonstrated observation that it encourages people to eat more. You don't need to know any more about it than that people eat more calories from ultra processed foods without realizing it. And that it's the idea that something is so indescribably delicious or so indescribably attractive or whatever that you can't stop eating it. And as one friend of mine said, if you're given us a big salad, you start eating that salad, you get to a point where you've had enough salad. You're presented with a bag of potato chips, you can't stop eating them.
Yeah. Was
And
your friend that you're talking about, Professor Barbara Rolls? Because it sounds like Barbara Rolls right out of the
she
wet
does the
foods.
research. She does the research. But no, this was just a friend who's not a nutritionist who was commenting that when he eats a salad, he knows when he's had enough salad.
Yes.
When he eats Oreo cookies, you put a bag in front of him, that bag will be empty. And some people have more or less trouble with that kind of thing, but everybody eats more if they're confronted with foods that are highly processed for some reason or other. We don't really know why, but
I,
that observation holds very strongly.
mm,
And that means from the standpoint of dietary advice, watch out for that stuff.
there
If
seems
you
to,
can't, if you can't stop eating from a large bag of cookies or chips, don't have it in the house.
hello, yes, thank you. And it doesn't mean don't have it in your life, but in your face is a different story. It's like pretending the wolf is a dog and blaming the wolf when the wolf bites you. It's not a dog,
Right.
it's a wolf.
One
Uh,
of the things about the obesity drugs that's so fascinating to me is that people say they stop the food noise.
yeah,
I had never heard the term food noise before, but I really, really like it. I get it right away. It's
yeah,
that feeling that if you've got it in the house, you just got to eat it.
yeah.
And when people are taking these drugs, they say that's gone. And
It's
they want to
it's
eat healthy foods and they don't want to eat junk foods.
well,
Amazing.
I will say this though, from as a prescriber since the first days of exenatide back in 2005, and as you know about me, and we don't need to make this discussion about, and it's public, so it's not a secret, but I went on some trials with my primary care doctor for my own binge eating. I said I wanted to try some of the GLP-1 drugs. I tried liraglutide, which was branded as Victoza or Saxenda prior to these, and I got a tachycardia from it. It's a known side effect. I said, okay, that can't work for me. And I did try
Mm.
semaglutide, and we're health professionals, so I got in a hellacious case of constipation.
Oh
It took
dear.
me like 2-3 months to get away from it. But I have to say, when I was on it, I was so even on the lowest dose, I was so appetite suppressed, which was great, that I I couldn't eat anything but calorie dense, highly processed foods. But even I would go to McDonald's and get a biscuit. I could finish 2/3 of it. I'm like, I can't eat any more of it.
Mhm.
So I do see a lot of people going the direction that you're talking about, but there is a concern that without a lifestyle kind of behavior modification program wrapped around it, many people will just leverage the effect of the drug, and when less than way less than half spend even a year on the drug, at least here in Michigan, that's our evidence, because of lack of
Mhm.
coverage or side effect. And the expense now is so high that until we can scale these drugs at generic cost, um, but I know the food industry is scared because it certainly helps people cut back on calories. That's for sure. And I want to thank you for the basically. I think what you're saying is the first law of thermodynamics still exists, and Kevin Hall's studies out of the NIH have pretty much shown us that. Sorry, as a matter of fact, there's almost virtually no difference if you cut calories with carbs or fats, and maybe there
Mhm.
was even a slight win for low fat, which is irrelevant because it was so non it was
Yeah,
so
but
it's
it's
so
so
much.
small. It's so
Yeah.
small you can. Yeah, because calories count. And but your point about the food industry being scared, I mean, I've always had this mantra, eating less is bad for business. It's really bad for business, and the food industry is running scared, not only because of these drugs, but also because of inflation. And and the general word, and because of the focus now on ultra processed foods, a concept that everybody gets right away. And the idea that you're supposed to cut back on ultra processed foods, the high price of foods, and the fact that these drugs make people not want to eat them. And ultra processed foods are the most profitable foods in the supermarket. This has the food industry quite concerned about where the profits are going to come from.
Yes, and
Too bad.
it's okay. They can be scared. It's time for them to finally be scared a little bit. No,
Mhm.
no
It's their
problem with me.
turn.
What with
Right.
the arable land that's available, and we have lost education in schools about nutrition, how to prepare food, cook food, grow food. If somebody has reasonable enough room in on their property and maybe as a community garden, do you see any hope in, and at least fill in the gap a little bit, grow some of your own vegetables and
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
resource those? Is that something that or is that really, yeah, drop in the bucket, forget about it?
It is drop in the bucket, but if you want to make that bucket bigger. I mean, I have a garden on my terrace in Manhattan. I have a peach tree, I have a cherry tree, I've got blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, I basil and tomatoes and that kind of thing. It's very easy to grow food if you make sure it's watered enough. But that's not something that Americans are trained to do, although I'm a big fan of school gardens. I think school gardens are magical in their effects. I've seen their effects. They completely change kids' relationship to food. And where food comes from is something that's really valuable for people to know. But you're dealing with a segment of the population that's generally healthy anyway. The real question is, how do you get healthful dietary habits to be adopted by a larger proportion of the population when there's so much evidence that eating healthfully is really helpful in preventing bad health? And I don't know about you, but in my age group, there's a lot of ill health around.
Well,
An
when
enormous amount of
I've
ill health.
often told patients taking on a lifestyle like Professor Marion Nestle, and you better start making younger friends. I mean, I hate to say the stark reality is that's absolutely true. The I mean, it's for some reason this is invoking the memory of Jack LaLanne. I'm sure you remember Jack and his wife
Ah,
Elaine,
yes.
who's now surpassed it. He made it to almost 97 exercising till the day before he died. His father obviously died of a massive heart attack in his 50s, and so Jack took this different path. Although I think he was a bit strict. His line was, "If it tastes good, spit it out," which was
Oh
maybe
dear. I would have a little trouble with that.
But he did get his wife to quit smoking, and she's still alive and running strong. And they both won Lifetime Achievement Awards from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So good for
Oh,
them.
that's
It's
not, that's terrific.
an organization that's trying to, and that I'm part of, that's trying to get lifestyle medicine back in medical education. So honing in on, because there's multiple subsegments, the legislation, schools at the elementary even level, middle school, arguably uppers, just the whole spectrum from kindergarten to 12th grade. But in terms of medical education, where we have really dropped the ball and just gotten so into the pills and procedures and the cutting, and it's all wonderful and it's all amazing science, and it's nothing I would want to get rid of. And we realize, like you said, drop in the bucket. We can't throw it all on us docs. It's tough enough. But what about that component of it? Would you like to see, leading question, would you like to see doctors more educated in nutrition and lifestyle?
Yeah, of course. But, I ran a nutrition education program at a medical school from 1976 to
Tell us more.
1980.
Yeah.
And already in 1976, when it started, the American Medical Association had had meetings on how do we get nutrition education into medical education for 20 years. So already when I was doing this, it had been going on for 20 years. And you add up the number of years since then, and nothing has changed. There are a few, because the basic fundamental structural issues of medical education haven't changed since then. Nutrition, everybody thinks that nutrition is really simple and really easy to talk about because everybody eats and everybody has personal opinions about what they're eating does to their health. But if you're dealing with a patient, you have to start from where that patient is and that person's view of food and nutrition, cultural history, habits, preferences. This is very time consuming.
It
And
is.
if you have been experiencing the healthcare system lately, you probably realize that if you get 15 minutes with your doctor and your doctor looks up from a computer, you're really lucky.
Yeah,
You're
that's true.
certainly, most of medicine is increasingly going to telemedicine. The business that used to be so important in medicine about the laying on of hands, the looking of the physical interaction between the doctor and patient, and the doctor putting his hand on your shoulder and saying, "You're going to get better." That's lost from medicine now. I think it's an incalculable loss, absolutely incalculable. It's a completely different interaction. I think science-based medicine is great, but when you lose that human component, you lose the value of somebody's belief in you. I don't know, this sounds crazy, but I don't know, it works for me. I miss all that. I liked it.
And it
Um,
seems like there were a lot of social ramifications, and without pointing fingers left or right, up or down, but that the pandemic seemed to, by shutting down a lot of healthcare and primary care visits and so forth, that if anything, it wounded the relationship even more. And the reimbursement patterns aren't such that it promotes
oh,
healthy
oh no, it's
counseling at
awful.
all. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's
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 awful.
terrible.
So, what can doctors do? All doctors can do is to say, I think it would be helpful if you met with a dietitian. And then you got to find a dietitian who is good enough to and well trained enough and sensitive enough to start from where the patients are and not to make recommendations that are completely outside of that patient's lifestyle. I mean, I've seen interactions between nutrition counselors and patients that just make me roll my eyes. Why are you telling this patient to do that? When,
I couldn't agree
when
more.
the,
I'll give you a couple examples from my clinical experience, and this is going to be the first time I've discussed this publicly, but I'm not going to mention any names. Um, Working in Detroit, I had a number of patients, and we always set up a meeting in which there were first two questions were, what are your why? Why is it you're seeking health? What really drives this? And then what are your non-negotiables? Because I'm just a
Mhm.
DOC. I'm not GOD. I'm a navigator. You're the pilot. You have to let me know what room can I go in, what room can't I go in. And I don't know if it's because my background is Mediterranean or whatever it is, but certainly was never, I never pushed it, the Mediterranean diet. But I had a number of African American patients, some who came to tears when I said, well, how would you like to eat? Is there a way you can help us guide you? And one of the quotes literally was, I'm so happy, doctor, I can't believe you're not going to put me on that whitey diet. And I said, and I go, what? He
Exactly.
says, what
Mm,
that
right.
Mediterranean thing? I'm like, oh, what? No, I'm not the boss. You're the boss. You tell us how you would you like. You give me some recipes, and I'll help. I'll talk to the dietitian. We're going to meet you where you live. And another one
Mm,
I'll never
right.
forget, all the way up to I was coaching some Fortune 500 executives, and one of them, when I asked non-negotiable, he said, Dr. Tom, I don't want to hear about any Mediterranean diet, bowl, blah, 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 blah. I'm Indian and there's no reason you can't help me with healthy Indian food.
Right.
Again, what am I doing? Am I waving a Mediterranean flag or something here? Why is everybody saying this?
Because it's what everybody's talking about and nobody
Yeah,
knows what it means.
yeah,
And it's so I mean there are nutritionists who are really, really good, and you got to find them. And I tell the doctors that I talk to and advise that they should find a nutritionist who's really terrific to work with, who reflects their views of this, and refer patients to the nutritionist. They can't do it in
yeah.
their 15-minute interviews. They can't. Um, and it takes work to find and time to find out what people want to eat, how they're eating. And in most cases of dealing with patients, you're going to be wanting patients to eat less, which is really hard. It's hard for anybody. And how are they going within their dietary patterns to figure out a way to eat less without making their lives miserable? And you don't want to make anybody's life miserable.
No, no, no.
Um,
So one of the way,
and
one of the,
lifestyle, I have to say, I gave a talk once to the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. It was a fabulous experience. Oh, I was talking to people who were right on the front lines, doing this work and doing it really, really well. I was very honored to be there, I have to say.
I'm going to have to recommend you again to Susan Benegas and the leadership because we'd love to have you back. One of the, of course, the issues, and I helped uh, my colleagues as dietitians. I'm almost never practiced more than 6 months out of the double-digit decades without a dietitian or
Mhm.
dietitians by my side. Their coverage is unfortunately poor. Now that's may start to improve, please. We need coverage for dietitian services. Number one. Number two, you're absolutely right. The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force makes it pretty clear it takes time. You can't just snap your fingers and expect somebody to change their lifestyle. And we always invited I would say the word better term is life partner, but whether it was spouse or whoever it is, the closest person in their home or their life with them, because they were often the shopper or the food preparer. And we would then have to translate everything through the patient to them. We said, no, just bring them on into any visit or a group meeting, not the psychology group meetings, because those a lot of times had trauma being discussed and so forth. But we need them to be part of this. We're not going to be treating them, but we want them to be able to ask questions because you're living in a social network. That nub of it is whoever you're living with. And if they're going to end up being a food saboteur, handing you the Haagen-Dazs in bed at night, we're going to have a, we're going to have a, oh, this is real. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. We would have patients whose coworkers would leave their favorite comfort food, even though they said, hey, look, go out and have lunch, no problem. I'll be here when you get back. And when they got back, the patient, they would find chili cheese fries on their desk. I mean, it's almost as if when you change your lifestyle, you become an
Noise.
emotional threat.
This
Yeah.
is food noise.
It's
Very
almost
loud.
you got to laugh to keep from crying. One of the ways that
Uh,
we help people with the volume issue, though it's a really big issue for many people that are volume eaters, was to leverage Barbara Roll's studies in terms of there are foods with so few calories per bite. We're going to put them on a list of things that I don't need you to worry about how many cups of blueberries you eat. Please, I dare you. Please go ahead. I
yeah.
dare you. Try to gain weight on blueberries. It won't
Mm.
happen. And it
I
did.
suppose it's possible, but it
Yeah,
would be very difficult.
you'd have to try to prove something. Sit all day long, and your trips to the bathroom though would would probably add a number of steps.
Oh, add a little ice cream. That would help.
um, the uh, the odds of this changing quickly, I think we've kind of summarizing a few things. The odds of this changing quickly are probably not good, but that we can't stop trying, because if we stop trying, then we have no hope at all. Is that fair to say?
Mhm.
Some of it will be public education, some will be public policy. I guess we haven't really gotten into the SNAP, WIC discussion, but there's
Oh,
probably
dear.
something to be
Yeah.
said there. Maybe we'll stop for a moment on, because that's a controversial area, freedom of choice and so on, et cetera. What are your thoughts in regards to, let's just say, SNAP, or what used to be called, food stamps?
Well, that takes us back to the Farm Bill.
Right.
You
There you
know,
go.
one of the weird things about the way the food system works is that 80% of the funding in the Farm Bill goes to SNAP. And so any any rational person would say, what on earth is SNAP doing in the Farm Bill? And SNAP is in the Farm Bill because you can't pass the Farm Bill without SNAP, and you can't pass SNAP without the Farm Bill. And this was something that President Johnson did in the 1960s, was to fuse them together, and they've been together ever since. And when I see Republican attempts to try to move SNAP out of the Farm Bill and separate them, I just laugh, because neither one of the bills will pass because they don't have the votes. And so Johnson did what was called log rolling and fused them. I'll vote for you, your preference, if you vote for mine, and that's where it is. But it completely distorts both the food assistance systems and the agricultural support systems are both distorted as a result. Um, but I think your question has to do with, should SNAP allow its benefits to be used for healthy foods?
Yeah, maybe give a
Is that
little
where,
more incentive and more power to the
uh,
dollar. Yes.
to the dollar, or something? Because the Women, Infants, and Children's program, a much smaller and very effective food assistance program for women with young children, um, allows those benefits to be used on specific categories of foods, extremely tightly defined, all of which are healthy and promote health. They're all health promoting foods from various food groups. And that was not the method that was used for WIC, for SNAP, because the politics of SNAP were to change it from a program that was originally designed to support farmers to one that was eventually designed to support retailers. Retailers make the most money out of SNAP, and bankers. The bankers and retailers make the money in SNAP. And so there's an enormous retail incentive to allow SNAP benefits to be used for any food in a grocery store. And there are very few restrictions on what SNAP recipients can buy with their benefits. They can't buy pre-prepared foods, they can't buy alcohol, they can't buy cigarettes. They practically can buy anything else. And so that when obesity became a problem, and obesity among SNAP recipients became a problem, people started thinking, well, maybe we should restrict sugar sweetened beverages from SNAP benefits. People could still buy those things with their own money, but we don't want taxpayer supported SNAP benefits used for sugar sweetened beverages, maybe candy, and other foods that are demonstrably unhealthful if consumed in large enough quantities. But by that time, retailers were pretty dug in. And so the few times that the Department of Agriculture, or petitions have gone to the Department of Agriculture to do pilot projects. Let's try a pilot project and see what happens. See how SNAP recipients feel about it, see what it does. The Department of Agriculture has turned them down because they're under enormous pressure not to start restricting certain kinds of foods by the manufacturers of those foods, who
Hmm.
will stand to lose a great deal of money, some enormous percentage of the amount of money that that retailers and food producers get comes from taxpayer supported SNAP benefits. So it's been very difficult to think about these questions without getting into issues of autonomy, self-determination, and whatever. I don't know. I've heard from a lot of SNAP recipients who say, yeah, the SNAP is an incentive for them to spend money on junk food because it's not taxed. And if they live in a state where food is taxed, they can get these foods for cheaper if they buy them on using their SNAP benefits. The incentives in this system are all crazy.
Do you think
They
that
really
a
don't work.
no, yeah, in the opposite, do you think that there's a chance for some sort of class action lawsuit to eventually come to fore as a force to be reckoned with and kind of quantum shift the system? I mean, it's not like smoking, and I've heard
Those
this too. I agree with you.
those suits are filed all the time.
Hmm.
I really don't know what it'll take. I mean, I think it takes a government that is concerned about public health. Well, the number of people who are food insecure, a term meaning that there's no reliable source of food on a daily basis, reliable and legal source of food on a daily basis. That percentage of the population is going up. It's actually quite alarming. It's reached a peak this year. It's as high as it's ever been. And this follows a period during the pandemic when the percentages dropped because people were being income supported and food assistance program benefits were broadening. We know how to fix these problems, but for political reasons, we just don't want to.
Well, one of your books, very well known, obviously has the word politics in it. We have a political season coming up, and isn't there? There may even be in the day that this is recorded, your birthday, a debate. I don't think we could get away, and we'll try to. I'm personally an
It's
independent,
my
by the
birthday present, this
that's
debate.
and this
Oh
next
dear.
question may or may not be, but if we can keep it as remembering that there's a spectrum of watchers of this from both sides and in the middle. Your thoughts purely on the issue of what he may or may not, or is his intentions are, or the way that I shouldn't say intentions, but his desire to change the food system. Is this a potential role for for Robert Kennedy Jr. to change the food system have any potential hope if it happens to be that he ends up in that position as a Secretary of Health or whatever else it is?
Um, I never believe anybody's campaign promises because people who are campaigning lie routinely, and there's plenty of evidence for that. He has very strange views about health issues. Some of them, politics makes very strange bedfellows. And some of the Republicans' ideas about what should happen to the food system make sense. Some of them don't. Um, I would say that
Can you give me
we
one of each on
know,
those and maybe one of each on the Democrat
um,
side, playing devil's
well,
advocate?
the Republicans want to try some different things with SNAP. Some of them make sense, some of them don't.
Okay.
Um, but as I said, I don't give much credibility to campaign promises except for Trump, who has a long history of saying exactly what he means in terms of his political ideas. So the 2025 agenda, I think, should be taken quite seriously as as an agenda for what will happen if Trump gets elected. But it's very difficult to predict what will happen. A lot of it depends on Congress and who gets elected to Congress and what that balance is like. And the politics are very difficult these days.
Yeah.
It's hard
Yes.
to know.
It,
And that's why I think it's very important for people to keep advocating for healthier and more sustainable food systems, because if we get lucky, maybe we'll be able to do some of that.
well, I certainly support that for sure. One of the, maybe as we were coming to a close here, one of the other big myths we talked about seed oils, is, and nobody is claiming that liquid sugar is a good thing, but if anything, the intake of sugary beverages has not been going up. It's been, if anything,
It's going down.
it's going down.
Mhm,
And there's a
mhm,
lot of demonization of sugar to the point where people are afraid of fruit, as if fruit, which has what 250 calories a pound on average, it probably would it would probably reduce your carbohydrate intake by virtue of all the intrinsic water. And I'm not talking about dried fruit or fruit juices here. I'm talking about whole, fresh,
mhm.
or frozen, whatever, wet foods, as Professor Rolls would say. Um, this spillover of concern about liquid sugar, true, to such hypervigilance over sugar that people are afraid of whole fruit. Uh, and the fact that actually, if anything, sugar is not going, liquid sugar is not going up, it's going down, and maybe it's the processed starch. Like you said, it's everything. It's the extracted fats. It's the refined starch, which, by the way, they will throw a bunch of salt in, since breads and rolls are a number one source of sodium in the United States, and we live in amber waves of salted grains, et cetera, et cetera. This demonization of sugar to the point where even fruit is feared. Any thoughts in that regard?
Well, I think there are only a few people, a very small percentage of the population goes that far. I think the idea, everybody would be healthier eating less sugar. Sugar has calories and nothing else. And soft drink consumption, full sugar sweetened soft drink consumption is way down compared to its peak in
How
1999.
did that happen?
But if you look, I'm sorry?
How did
Well,
that
that's
happen? What,
public health.
right?
That's
Right?
public health. That was an extraordinary public health effort, but it's still much, much, much higher than it was in the 1950s. So we still have quite a way to go on it. And I'm reading that young people aren't drinking full sugar beverages. They're not interested in alcohol. That's nice too. That's good too. Um, and if we can encourage people to appreciate healthier beverages, I think that's fine. I mean, I'm kind of astounded by the whole beverage thing, because you go into a supermarket and half the supermarket is beverages, when really water is pretty good and not very expensive. Uh, but you want to have a more interesting beverage. It doesn't have to be sweet, or it doesn't have to be that sweet. And you see these fruit flavored waters all over the place. They're certainly better than full sugar things. I don't like the way they taste very much, but that's me.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I'm coming from my own background as a kid of a full-blown Coke addict, as terms of Coca-Cola,
uh,
carbonated water,
mhm,
sugar, caramel color, phosphoric acid, natural flavorings, and caffeine. That was the
mhm.
level of addiction, or dependency, maybe is the better word, that drove me. In fact, I remember deciding I was going to stop, but my transition was I could have it at my buddy Scott's house, because we always jammed guitar on Sundays. I'm like, so I then I weaned myself away. It took like an intervention program. As we're winding down here, of course, for everyone on this program, we have, whether it's Barry Franklin, the past president of the American College of Sports Medicine, or Walter Willett, or Barbara Rolls, or we ask a little bit about, what is your life? How do you stay physically active? And we simply believe whatever someone will do regularly is the most important exercise. We're not expecting a high intensity interval training lecture or anything, but how do you stay physically
Mhm.
active? And food wise, how would you describe? I mean, it is, since it's so non dedicated to any singular thing. I mean, it seems like you are a plant predominant type of flexitarian, or how would you describe how you eat and stay physically active,
No,
and your lifestyle?
I would never advise anybody to do what I don't do. I mean, I never would. I find it very easy to follow a largely, but not exclusively plant-based diet. I eat everything. I'm an omnivore. Do I eat meat? Yes, I just don't eat very much of it. Do I eat junk food? Yes, I just don't eat very much of it. Sort of, I don't find that very difficult. It's pretty easy. And as for physical activity, I live in New York City. I don't have a car. It's as simple as that. I
Well,
don't do anything else besides that. If I want to go someplace, I have to walk. or
That
take the subway. And if I take the subway, I have to walk. It's built in to my lifestyle. I've just spent several days in Los Angeles. I didn't move an inch. I was in a car all the time. Well, for one thing, it was 116 degrees, so you weren't going to be wandering around outside, but it's a different lifestyle. And if you live in a car culture, it's really difficult to be active. If you live in a city with public transportation, where there are things around that you can walk to and you're walking to them, you're doing really well. I mean, I'm very interested in looking at the literature on physical activity as how little you have to do to show a benefit in longevity and good health.
it
I
is
mean,
amazing.
it used to be 10,000 steps. Now it's 6,000 steps. And now it's 4,000 steps. And the benefit that you get from anything higher than that is incremental.
Very little.
But the
Yeah.
fact but the fact that most people in America don't walk 4,000 steps a day, that's the equivalent of 2 miles
Yeah.
in an entire day. Most people don't. But if you live in New York, you have to.
So it's built into your
Um,
natural and it's natural movement for you. It's built into your
Absolutely.
lifestyle.
I don't belong to a gym. I've never belonged to a gym. I don't do any of that. I do some physical activity, yoga, physical
Flexibility and
therapy,
balance.
flexibility, strength, balance, core. But it's 15 minutes a day.
Yeah, but that's
Not
right.
any,
You don't, it's
it's not any more
consistency.
than that.
That's right. You don't
Yeah,
need the dose that's
it's not
needed
more
is so
than that.
much less. People listen to the
Yeah.
message of Professor Nestle,
But
please.
if it was more than that, I wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
You
And
know,
if you,
if I have a 10-minute routine, I have no excuse not to do it. It's only 10 minutes,
yes, there's even a
and
7 minute app if you want to go start with 7 minutes. Heck, I don't care if you start with 1 minute, just start. It's
yeah.
amazing. And you mentioned something that I think is so cool. And we discussed this, I believe, off. I'm going to share something and see if you um, don't mind just checking out. This is a food pyramid that we have built. But most importantly, at the very top, we have what we call this 5% fun zone. In other words, we're not worried about what you do 5% of the time. Let me see if we can pull this down here, make it a little bit bigger. Now, remember, we use that term calorie rich, refined, and highly processed, but it can't be 35, 45, 60. It can't be at the base of your pyramid. And when you're having it, sure, enjoy it and have some fun, but it's probably not a great idea to keep it surrounding you in your house if you're someone that is an impulsive. But go out and have a little bit. Don't call it a guilty pleasure or a cheat day or whatever all that terminology is, but don't bring the wolf back into the house. Pretend it's a dog and then blame the wolf when the wolf bites you. You are what you eat and you eat what surrounds you. And this has been such a phenomenal conversation. Happy birthday again, Professor Nestle.
Thank you.
I wish you another 20 years of excellent life. And I said it off the air, and I'm going to say it here. I want to be like you when I grow up.
Thank you very much.
It's been
Nice to be with you. It's nice to meet you.
it's
And hello
a
to
true
everybody
pleasure.
watching.
Thank you so much.